Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, we are sitting on a bench with our laptop perched precariously on a trash can yet again, so it must be one of the very best kinds of Tuesdays. Surprise last minute live show Tuesdays. You love to see it.
Yes, talked with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and Will Howard today, recapping Akron, actually talking about the opponent a little bit, which was something they did. Nobody asked about Akron last week on Tuesday. Now there was a little bit of Western Michigan, I think partly because Western Michigan gave Wisconsin a game this week. So it's like, well,
look, they're people.
When did this opponent get here? So, yeah, a little bit of talk about Western Michigan. Overall, Ryan Day, I would say, first off, after rewatching the film and all of that, they're not perfect yet. So that is still an issue. Plenty of things to clean up. Wanted more people grading out as a champion than did, so that gives everybody something to drive towards and to focus on. So things obviously got better in the second half, and that's great. But there was a lot of talk about starting fast this week, and Will Howard talked about it, Chip Kelly talked about it, and Ryan Day talked about it. I think maybe the one thing that we're not acknowledging or that we just kind of gloss over is, and Chip Kelly mentioned it, all of the players starting and playing a significant amount of time in the horseshoe for the first time. And you can go across the offensive line. You can throw Quinshon Judkins in there. You can throw Jeremiah Smith in there, Will Howard. Like, so many guys on offense were playing their first real action in Ohio Stadium, and it showed.
It did show. And that week one always looks like week one. Week one looks exactly the same in so many different ways. And that's true all over the place. Week one looked like week one for the Michigan Wolverines. Week one looked like week one for the Oregon Ducks. I mean, there was a lot of teams across the country that had much, not worse, just more awkward, more uncomfortable week ones than Ohio State did. So I think there's a certain amount of, you just sort of hand wave some of it as it's just week one. Now, if it shows up again in week two, and then they've got week three off, and then again in week four, then at that point, you see, if you see it this weekend, okay, maybe make a note of it. Week one, I'm kind of willing to just sort of hand wave everything. Week two, make a note of it. If you see it again in week three, that's when it's okay, this is officially a problem. I don't think there's a concern right now, but there's certainly some points of emphasis.
Yeah, and we always talk about, and coaches always talk about, it's never as bad as you think, and it's never as good as you think after watching the film. This is more evidence of that. And the offensive line being what it is, you're still trying to figure out if Donovan Jackson is going to be back this week. Ryan Day called him day-to-day, same as Cody Simon. So there you go, Mika. Day-to-day, and they'll evaluate them today, see how they go, and planning on practicing if they can, but it's impossible to predict right now how they're feeling and how they'll be feeling after a week of practice if they go. And they're not going to push either of those guys to any kind of bounds that might do them even more harm. So there's no reason to play them.
Right.
And I think that is ultimately the way, unless they're completely 102%, there's what benefit is there playing them just yet when you have a bye week coming up?
Correct. Yeah, you could sort of hustle them back and have them play this week, and then maybe they re-aggravate stuff, and maybe they don't. But if you can have them practice this week to whatever degree they're comfortable with having them practice, and then have them rest this week, then you have an off week next week. So then you have another chance to really make sure everyone's 100%. Because it's not like they're coming back the week after the off week and immediately traveling to Oregon. You got Marshall at home. You got Michigan State on the road, and you don't want to read too much into week one, but Michigan State does not look like this is going to be a Mark D'Antonio era juggernaut. So you've got a little bit more of a ramp up, and then you've got Iowa at home, and then you've got Oregon. So it's going to get a little more difficult, but for someone like Donovan Jackson or someone like Cody Simon, who's been around as long as they have, played as many snaps as they have, I don't think there's any reason to rush them back. And Ryan Day's answer was, you sit in enough of these press conferences, and, well, those guys are day-to-day. What does that mean? Well, it means either yes, they will play, or no, they won't play. Well, so he answered your question without answering your question. So my guess is you probably see those guys sit again, at least one of those guys, maybe both, sit again this week, just because why rush them back? There's no huge rush. There's nothing that is Ohio State should have no problem winning this game. If there is a game that boils down to Ohio State needs one of those guys to win, boy, they have major problems. So give them another week off. Just play it easy, because you don't want to do what they did with Jackson Smith and Jigba in 2022, where they brought him back for what was that, the Iowa game, and it was like well, he's probably okay. You want to bring him back for the Iowa game, and then he re-aggravates it, and then you functionally lose him for the year. They don't want to do that, so you just take it easy. There's no real reason. If they're back this weekend, that tells me they are really 100%.
And you went through it with Travion Henderson last year as well, where you just never quite get healthy. And so you give them this week off. They get the bye week off. Then you've got Marshall and Michigan State to get ready for Iowa. Mm-hmm. So I think that's plenty buildup for two guys who are a fourth-year senior and a fifth-year senior. No, they don't want to be missing any games at this point, but I'm sure they would give up the Western Michigan game to be able to play Michigan or Big Ten championship game or whatever. Like this, these are not the most important senior defining. Gosh, my senior season was great, Tom.
Yeah,
but I just never got my Western Michigan pants.
Yeah, that's what color are the Western Michigan pants? Brown pants. Brown pants. All right. Reminded of a great joke about a pirate, but that's we'll maybe get to that later. Yeah, this is one of these things where they only played 13 games last year. They could very easily, those guys could both sit out the first game of the season and still play more games this year. The first game and the second game of the season, and play more games this year. So, yeah, I think that's to me, just from the outside, that feels like that's a very simple, direct answer.
Yeah, if Ryan Day's not saying, oh, they're playing, there's a pretty good chance that they're not playing, and that's what you should just assume. So.
Yep. Doug Shepard says hit the thumbs up. You should do that, in my humble opinion. Let's see. Here's one from Tyler Shore. Says, "What's up, fellas? Kind of stinks we didn't get Knowles at the presser. Would have liked to hear what he thought about the Reese and Hicks performances." That
I didn't check the email until today, and I thought we would get Knowles each week. Mm-hmm. I was interested to hear what he had to say about Arvell Reese, and I did see PFF their pass rush grades for the Big Ten. Like CJ Hicks was towards the top, but everything else was towards not. But just watching Arvell Reese, like, he stands out. He wasn't perfect. I saw him miss tackles or miss at least one tackle as well. But watching him get sideline to sideline, there's a lot to like there. Ryan Day said as much, and I would expect he's another reason why you don't need to bring Cody Simon back just yet. Mm-hmm. And Ryan Day did say they love the way Sonny Styles communicated everything. This is his first time doing that in a game. Another first-time guy, new position. Mm-hmm. Everybody at linebacker is playing more than they had ever played before at linebacker. So credit to them for playing as well as they did. They weren't perfect. They're going to grow from this. But Arvell Reese, the effort that he shows and the way, like, when he gets to the ball carrier and he's like hammering down on the football, he brings a lot of violence. You can see why people really, really like him, and they're already moving on from other players. Like, you've latched on to somebody like, I want to see more of him, and that's great when that's a guy that was the third string middle linebacker before camp, and clearly he is the backup if we're not considering Sonny Styles as the number two, because he played before Gabe Powers. Like, he was part of that rotation. So I wonder if he stays part of that rotation when Cody Simon comes back.
Yeah, I think he may be playing himself into a bigger role, and that's something where he doesn't have to play 50 snaps. He can play, that can be 15 snaps. That can be give Cody Simon a drive off here or there in the first half, or just, 7 plays into a drive, you can swap out a different Mike linebacker, and that's okay. What was impressive to me was not just the play, but also he's wearing that green dot. So really his first real action, he's out there, and he's got to also be, sort of running the show on the defense. And they were talking to him, because I saw him at one point with his hands over his ears. That's how I knew he had the green dot, because he was listening to the calls, and that's a lot to throw on a guy. And it's a lot to throw on a guy like Sonny Styles to who has played before, but hasn't played linebacker much before, and really hasn't played much Mike linebacker before.
Yeah.
So that was a lot. And, that was a good game for them to sort of work out the kinks, work out the bugs, ramp up a little bit to a little bit more of a serious opponent coming up this week.
Well, you say it was because of the communication. I saw DJU doing this last night, and I think it was because he was trying to not hear the boos.
The old Bobby Bonilla,
So,
yes, with the earplugs.
But the Reese thing at linebacker, middle linebacker, could it become a Curtis Grant, Raekwon McMillan thing where those two were almost even? It was probably 55-45. I don't think it's going to get to that, but like a 70-30, something like that. But
could, yeah.
I mean, you don't want to take somebody off the field to somebody that you really, really like Cody Simon. But I think there is a benefit to keeping everybody fresh. Again, 16, 17 games like everybody's talking about. So it's not just do it to do it, but if you can do it and there's not much of a drop off, or you get something else out of it, so I think there's a huge benefit to getting him involved. Like I said, it's not going to be 50-50, but if he can keep himself as part of that rotation, I think that would be a significant step and a significant sign of what they think of Arvell Reese. Because we've heard Jim Knowles rave about people before. We don't always see him put it in action.
Yeah.
He's put it in action here. Now, do it when Cody Simon's also healthy, and then I'll believe you. But from what we saw,
right, yeah,
I tend to believe him.
Yeah, he seems like he's trending in that direction. I don't know if he's there right yet, but it feels like if he has another solid week this weekend against Western Michigan, and then you got a week off, and then you've got Marshall and you got Michigan State, those are really 4 games where you're not in any real danger of losing. I mean, it would take, sure you could lose, but you look at the bottom of the ticker on ESPN, and there's a lot of games going on right now where it's so and so has a 99% chance of winning. Now ESPN's FPI or FEI or whatever, FPI I think, because FEI is the good one from Brian Fromeau, but FPI is kind of like, I mean, I don't put a ton of stock in that, but also 99% means even if it's off by a factor of 10, congratulations, you're only 90% likely to win the game. So yeah, these are chances for them to play other guys. And we talked about this on the Michigan Monday show. Michigan has been really good about playing younger guys, getting guys reps, getting guys ready to go, so that if you do lose someone, you're not throwing someone just cold in off the bench. They've gotten meaningful reps. They swapped out their whole secondary at one point in the second quarter, and it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. And those guys are getting reps against ones. You might start to see, it'll be interesting to see if Ohio State embraces that approach, because it feels like that's been a beneficial thing for Michigan.
Yeah, and it has. But also, so many of the backups for Ohio State right now are juniors. They're like upperclassmen themselves. So it's not like you're not in danger by putting Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson out there. No. Safety, though, the drop off is pretty stark. So I don't know how much you'll see it there. As Jim Knowles told us last week, it's 14-0. No, I'm not putting anybody out there other than the starters. And, you could have Lathan out there with somebody or Caleb Downs out there with somebody, but I wouldn't foresee them just, what? Let's go ahead and throw those 2 guys out there, throw out to Jalen McClain and Malik Hartford and see what happens. Because let's see what happens isn't something that you necessarily want to do with first and second year guys at the back end.
No, and especially given what Ryan Day talked about in terms of the metrics they're looking at this year. He made this sort of like offhanded remark about the fact that they're kind of keeping an eye on certain metrics that are going to play into the college football playoff selection. And he was asked about that today and went into a little more detail on it. And just, it's essentially all of the game control kind of stuff that you've heard the committee talk about before.
Goals allowed.
Something like that. Yes. Goal differential. Yes. Away goals. Yes. All of these important things. Now, this is something that the playoff committee talks about every year. But as Ryan Day said, in previous years, it was kind of top 4, either you're in or you're out. And if you were the number 2 versus the number 3, was literally the difference of which color jersey do you wear and which locker room are you at. There was functionally no difference between being 2 and 3. This year, if you are 1 versus 2, that's a significant difference. If you're 5 versus 6, that's a significant difference, because 5 might play a team like Boise State or another non-Power 5 team, Liberty or someone like that. Number 6 might play Penn State or Notre Dame or someone like that. So you want to be as high up those rankings as you can, and they're paying attention to all the little stuff. And he said they are talking to some of the younger guys about all the stuff at the end of the game that matters, because scoring margin and all that kind of stuff, yards per play, all that stuff, they're looking at that in terms of figuring out where those playoff rankings are going to sit. So giving up a late touchdown, even if it is garbage time, that can matter depending on who's looking at it.
Yeah.
Got a super chat here from King Bronco.
Thank you, King Bronco.
Broward looking good. Well, Broward. So I'm going to assume that's Broward County, which is down in Florida.
I think it's Will Howard.
Well,
Bill Howard.
Maybe Howard. Yes, looking good. He's worried. All right. Well, King Bronco is worried. Yes. Will Howard, I think, had a very solid first game. Not spectacular. He did. Tony, did he grade out as a champion?
In fact, he did grade out as a champion. People are going to give me grief. Will Howard is up there. I'll own this. Will Howard, I asked him, you came into this offense. We always talk about all of these 5-star NFL players around him, but you were the guy that came in and you were the offensive player of the game. He's like, how'd that feel? He's like, yeah, it's cool. But, I had goals. You want to win. You want to grade out a champion. You want to do this and this and that. And then he went on. I'm like, so did you grade out a champion? And he's like, yeah. And then Jerry Hemmig, SID, shouts, well, doesn't shout, but he's like chimes in, he's a player of the game.
Well, yes, the thing is, I just want to get what that means, but you want to have it confirmed.
I wanted to get it confirmed because I know people were going to ask, so did he grade out a champion? Who did he grade out a champion? And I wanted to be like, probably, because he's the player of the game. So that's usually
usually the guy who grades out the highest is the player of the game. So yeah, that is. So yes, good news for Will Howard in his first game.
I think we need to stop making this about me and make it about the fact that your quarterback graded out a champion in his first game as an Ohio State Buckeye. This is not about me. We're talking about practice.
Mm-hmm. We are talking about practice. Let's hit a couple of these questions. Let's see. We're going to start with one from Lisa Sims. Who do you think will have the better offense, USC or Ohio State?
I think maybe we buried Lincoln Riley too early and forgot that he's always got a good offense. Now,
how good was their offense?
Well,
I noticed their defense a lot more than their offense.
Yeah, no. Well, that's because it's the first time you've ever noticed their defense doing something well, so it stands out. But I saw them running the ball well. I saw them. Miller Moss does enough. I will also say, it is still interesting that everybody likes Miller Moss. Lincoln Riley was trying to get Will Howard out of the portal. So that's something to also keep in mind. But when you look at the Big Ten, do you see any reason that USC won't be successful offensively this year relatively? Now, I think Ohio State will have the better offense. They have more skill. They have, all of the reasons why. So to answer the question, Ohio State will have the better offense. But I think USC is going to cause some problems. I think Michigan's in trouble.
I think there's a pretty good chance Michigan has 2 losses before the end of September, which then makes a fascinating question about strategy vis-a-vis postseason bans.
I already said it.
Yeah, we've said that a couple times. Watching that game on Sunday night was a little more like, this might not go well for them than I thought before. USC was better than I expected, and again, you don't want to overreact to week 1. We'll see what they look like in the coming weeks, but yeah, it was definitely a more coherent team, a little more just a better team overall.
You also don't want to overreact. Sorry, you don't also want to overreact how somebody does against Brian Kelly in the season opener.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you go back through a lot of years when it was, Florida State beat LSU in the season opener a couple of years ago, and it was like, oh man. And then they were I think fine, but not incredible. I always go back to the Notre Dame Texas game in 2015, 16, something like that, where the 18-wheeler package was going to revolutionize college football, and then Texas, I think, might have missed a bowl that year. So you can't read too much into week 1 because you don't really know. Everyone wants to act like they know. They don't really know. And so, you've got people who are, I saw something on the ticker on ESPN during the Boston College Florida State game last night, where it said SEC teams dominate lesser competition or something. It was like 4 SEC teams scored 60 plus points. Like, congratulations, that's great. How did LSU do? How did Florida do? There was another one that lost.
Vanderbilt won.
Vanderbilt sure did win. Yes. There was another SEC team that lost as well, or maybe that was week 1. I don't remember. But they had lost 3 of 4. Florida lost the 1, but yeah. Either way, yeah, they had lost a bunch of things. And so everyone wants to jump to these great conclusions. I remember after the Ohio State Virginia Tech game in 2014, Clay Travis tweeting that the Big Ten has officially been eliminated from the national championship competition. That was week 2, and you don't want to read too much into the early ones, especially now where one loss doesn't eliminate you.
Florida State's not even eliminated yet, and they've lost 2 in the conference.
Florida State technically is not eliminated, mathematically not eliminated yet, but not looking great, not looking tremendous. Here's one from Mika, and this sort of goes into the same conversation. Oregon looks overrated. I got to watch about the last 5 minutes of that game, so I do not have strong opinions on it. I know that they put up huge numbers, but didn't put up huge point totals. So I kind of want to see another Oregon week before I make any firm conclusions.
Well, it was interesting to look, and Dylan Gabriel was like 41 of 49 or something for 380 some yards, something like that. But they scored 24 points,
right? Which
is alarming, and they didn't run the ball very well. And that was like the Michigan Fresno State game. That was a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So it's concerning, but it is week 1. But also like that shouldn't happen. But again, how many new players do they have there? They've got a handful of new players. Dylan Gabriel obviously new, but it is interesting that's how you open against an opponent that I don't know what they were favored, probably 5 or 6 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns or so in that one. So that was it's interesting. Maybe more alarming than concerning at this point.
Yeah, it was certainly something that was a head turner that I had been listening to the Michigan game on the radio and on the way home, and from the Ohio State game, and got home, and they had sort of seized control of that game at that point. I walked in the door, and my son says, "Did you see what happened with Oregon?" And I said, "What?" It had not occurred to me to check the Oregon-Idaho score on my way out of town, but yes, that was a little bit of a surprise. Mika with a follow-up. If Oregon does flop, hope Ohio State flips Dorian Brew. I mean, there's a possibility there. I mean, you've got there's potential drama on both sides, flipping in, flipping and out of the Ohio State defensive back class. Naeem Offord had a visit to Auburn, I believe, last weekend. So, if Naeem Offord leaves, does that open a spot for Dorian Brew? Maybe, we'll see. I think if you gave Ohio State coaches their druthers, I think if you said you can keep your class, or you can take what's behind the other door. I know math says you should always take what's behind the other door. Not in this case. I think Ohio State would probably be happy to keep their class as is, but there were plenty of other good options out there. So here's one from Tyler Shores, and this is something that Mark Givler's been talking about at times in the past. Watching Hicks just screams, move him closer to the line and unleash him off the edge feels like him being labeled an off-ball linebacker as a recruit has people confused.
Well, the entire time that Jim Knowles has been here, he has always talked about how effective CJ Hicks is at rushing the passer and getting into the backfield, just getting into the backfield. When they give him a directive and say, this is where we want you to go and do this, as an attacker, he's always better. And as a reactor, that's where the issues have come in. And so this is one game, played more than he'd ever played before. Let's see, again, is it just this one game, or is this what he is? And in that case, then you begin to move him down and get him more involved. But remember, in the spring, in preseason camp, and again, they have all of this information. They should already know whether he can or can't do this. But until you actually play the games, that's really where they need the confirmation. So he's obviously done some of it well enough in practice. See how it goes in the games. And at some point, you're going to be like, okay, now we know what you can and can't do. And you're going to allow him to make mistakes in these games. That's the only way to correct him and see on film, this is why you need to be doing this. This is what you did here. Why did you do this? This is why you did this. Now that you know that, don't do it next time. You have that room for error, a lot of room for activities in these games, in these non-conference games. But if it still doesn't get cleaned up and there's a way that he can help you rushing that passer, do that, or else don't, can watch from the bench. Basically, if you can't find a way to use him, then there's not a purpose for him to be out there. And I think they like him too much for there not to be just, you know what, we're just going to set him aside, because they know how effective he can be at getting into the backfield. They just maybe need to focus on that. And really, kind of like Josiah Stewart last year for Michigan, where he's a designated pass rusher, and they're about the same size.
Yeah.
And now you see Josiah Stewart now more of a well-rounded player after getting that experience doing that. So maybe that can be a plan of attack for CJ Hicks, but he's too talented not to be able to do something, especially when there are things that he can do that they like and they know he can do them. So just do those things.
Yeah, Josiah Stewart, what did he have, 2 sacks in the first game? I mean, that may be ultimately where his destiny ends up being, because you look at Sonny Styles. Sonny Styles was a safety last year, and I think everyone kind of looked at him and went, yeah, but what if he was a linebacker? And it took a little while to get that to be reality, but then it is, it's working okay so far. We'll sort of see. Again, you don't want to overreact to week 1. Drowsy Dragon says James Peoples really does look like a clone of J.K. Dobbins. He is going to be great. They are certainly big fans. I mean, Chip Kelly was talking about the fact that James Peoples, he was asked about Trey Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, and are you calling different plays based on, when you're deciding what you're going to do you look at, oh, hey, this guy's in, I want to call this type of run? And he said, no, you've got 2 guys who are really well-rounded, who can really do everything you ask them to do. And James Peoples is kind of the same way. That's pretty high praise for someone who's a true freshman.
Yeah, it is. And you saw in just a little bit of action. I think they're going to try to get him more this week, because he looks extremely comfortable. And the touchdown run, really nice cut, and just he's sudden. The balance he has is great. He's low to the ground. He's tough to tackle. I would love to see what he does with 15 carries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if and when that happens. I suspect you may see that at some point soon-ish. Speaking of things you may see soon-ish, Drowsy Dragon, will we ever get to see Julian Sayin in garbage time, or is Day locked in with Devin as QB2?
Tom, Ryan Day was asked a roundabout, and then directly, hey, who's your number 3 quarterback? And the answer was exactly as you would expect. They're all working at it. We're all working at it. He would not put a name to that, because he was asked if they were close to putting a 3rd quarterback in the game, and he said no, not really. They really wanted to get Devin Brown out there and running the offense. We saw him throwing downfield, so they did just operate the offense and not just hand off. So they would eventually like to get a 3rd guy in there if they could, but he would not say who that would be. And maybe at this point it depends on how the week goes, because who was it that he was talking about had Arvell Reese kind of like last week, where the preparation wasn't quite where it needed to be, and then the last few days it was, and that elevated to him getting more playing time. So things can turn. I think with the 3rd quarterback, 4th quarterback, some of those guys are scout team along with like Chad Ray or whomever. So I don't know exactly who is doing all of that work and who is still competing for that 3rd quarterback. But I think obviously they would like to see one of them get some reps. But once you do that, you kind of give away the depth chart at that point. But also by saying they're all working through it right now, you're kind of saying, well, you are 3 this week. Doesn't mean you're 3 next week.
Yeah. And that's something that they want to make sure guys stay engaged, because you have seen this team have to go down the depth chart at times with injuries and that kind of thing. So you need guys to stay engaged. You don't want to have people feel like, 1 foot out the door already, which it's pretty early in the season. And I think the expectations around this team are such that I think that will keep guys from checking out in a way that, if you're 3rd on the depth chart at Florida State, maybe you're looking at the door a little more than someone might be here.
Do you remember who the first backup quarterback was in 2020?
In 2020, the first quarterback to come in the game was Jack Miller. Yes, that was against Nebraska, and that was, even at the time, you and I both kind of looked at each other and went, yeah. Sometimes it feels like things get done for reasons other than purely reading the depth chart off the wall in the office.
No, not starting quarterbacks.
No,
but
right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
you're when you're starting, you're starting. When you're bringing guys in, it's the same thing with the way they will talk some guys up. Sometimes they're saying stuff not for our benefit, but for the benefit of the guys who maybe need to hear it, good or bad. Speaking of Florida State, Mike says when Dion replaces Norvell, half those guys will hit the portal. And I think I tried to find Mike Norvell's buyout, and he's got his contract is functionally a little over $10 million a year for this plus 7 more years. So he has basically $80 million left on that contract.
They need to find a lawsuit.
Well, yeah, if you can fire him for cause, that's great. But I think you've got, with all the other stuff that they're looking at spending money on, I don't think they want to get involved in yet another lawsuit. And with all the other stuff they've got to spend money on, and also with the fact that, do you really want to be the school that fired a guy 4 games out from going 11 or 12-0? I mean, probably not.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
In my opinion, and I tweeted something about, like Mike Norvell's trying to get fired on Labor Day, which is crazy. But it would be crazy to watch Deion Sanders and that whole operation at Florida State with a lot more he's a legend down there, obviously, but also there are higher expectations at Florida State than Colorado. So a 6-win season and being on TV a bunch isn't really going to move the needle at Florida State. But yeah, there's too much invested right now in Norvell and moving this program forward. And there's already, who knows where the ACC is going to be. Florida State may have to buy its way into the Big Ten at some point. Like it's like buying yourself into a tournament, like where it's like, all right, we'll get $50 million, we'll let us in, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I tweeted this something of a joke last night, but it was, the Big Ten commissioner watching the second straight Florida State pant soiling, and it was the guy on The Price is Right bidding $1. It's like, that's probably, you're not upping your value right now.
No, definitely not.
And that's a little bit tongue in cheek, because obviously that's not a decision that's going to be made on one football game. Something like that's. There's
it's 2 now, though.
It is 2. Yeah, I mean, at some point it maybe matters.
That's twice the amount of information.
Yeah, if you have multiple years, yeah, that's a bigger thing. Let's see. Let's roll through a couple more, because we do need to wrap it up relatively soon. Son of Sarek says, I was happy with how the defense looked. O-line blocking looked okay, but needs improvement. And that's basically what Ryan Day and Chip Kelly said.
Yeah, it's okay. There are things they liked, things they didn't. Also, Ryan Day said there are things that the running backs could have done better here and there. So everybody has a little bit of blame there. But overall, they like the possibilities to the point where Ryan Day said, even if Donovan Jackson gets back, they'd still like to get Austin Searveld some time in there and continue to let him play, because it's only going to help him and it's only going to help the depth and the offense overall if it should come to that, because it has come to that. Mm-hmm. So there's no telling if it'll come to that again. So the more work he can get, the better they will be overall. But again, first game for so many of these guys, starting a lot of newness. First game for Seth McLaughlin, 2 new guys on either side of them, and you grow from here. First game to second game, I'm expecting them to be even better. They still average 5.5, 5.2, 5.5 yards a carry, which is fine. I think they'll be better this coming week, even though Western Michigan seems like they might be better than Akron. But game 2 for Ohio State is going to be better than game 1.
Right. You always see the biggest improvement from week 1 to week 2. You expect an improvement this week. Dodd Droko in the comments said he's going to the Indiana game the week before the Michigan game. What to expect weather-wise? I think Doug has it nailed here. Sometimes 50s isn't comfortable, but it could also be 30s with rain or snow. The last time Indiana was at Ohio Stadium, it was the week before the Michigan game, and it snowed. Mm-hmm. And it was chilly, but I think 2022, I think the week after that, the Michigan game was 50 degrees and sunny. So, yeah, the weather will be something. Check again a little closer to kickoff time.
Plan accordingly by waiting to plan.
Yes. So it's not procrastination. It's just good planning to wait. Jordan Kapler says, question for Tom. Why? Answer.
That's good thought.
Why not?
Oh.
Here's one from Rick Pierce. Why are we only getting one coordinator this year at the presser?
I don't know that that's ever really been a standard rule. I will expect both coordinators at some point, throughout the season. It just fluctuates. Like there have been before, there wasn't necessarily a reason to get a coordinator each week or offensive coordinator each week, because you had Ryan Day on Tuesday. So that would cover all of those bases. And that's why we would get Knowles last year, because we never really got Brian Hartline on a Tuesday, maybe once, where it's like, we're going to have Brian Hartline this time, or, they change it up here and there, but not, I don't think there's any uniform head coach both coordinators, just head coach. And I would expect probably Jim Knowles next week. Although next week there might not be anybody because might just be day, if day, because it's going to be an open week.
And sometimes during the open week, they'll give us the specialists or someone like that we haven't gotten for a while or haven't gotten yet this season. It really just kind of depends. And this year there's 2 open weeks. So who knows? We may get 2 weeks with a specialist. Who knows? Son of Sarek says, didn't one of our DBs transfer to LSU? So J.K. Johnson, I believe, went to LSU. And J.R. Brown both did. Yeah. So, and I don't think either of them
were. Seven Banks?
Well, I'm quite certain the Seven Banks is out of eligibility at this point. But did either of those guys? Did you see either of those guys playing?
I did not. I did not notice the name. I know Cam Martinez was out yesterday.
Yeah, Cam Martinez was hurt for Boston College last night. Yeah,
but I didn't recognize anything. The only transfer name that I've heard so far in any of these games has been Mason Arnold in week 0. And then I guess
last night, the former Ohio State long snapper, he is now at Florida State. And I know Evan Pryor had a touchdown for Cincinnati. Joe Royer had, I think, 89 yards receiving. So those guys are both at Cincinnati now.
Evan Pryor rushed for like 102 or 105 yards on 4 carries yesterday or Saturday. Not bad.
Jeff Frazier says, guys, do you see a scenario where Luke Montgomery may start barring an injury? I think that's probably, in 2025, yes, absolutely. In 2024 right now, it feels like they have an injury and he's not starting. Right. And he wasn't necessarily the next guy in. I think felt like Carson Hinzman was the next guy in. So I think you're going to see him starting in 2025. But this year, unless you have at least a couple injuries, probably not. I think you're going to see him plenty. You're going to see him lots in the second halves of games and that kind of stuff. And we saw him on Saturday against Akron. But right now, it feels like they're at a point where the depth is such that they're not at a point where they need to play him, which is probably a good thing. A second-year offensive lineman is always going to be a little bit of a project. That's just in terms of the typical development path for offensive linemen. Austin Sierveld, who they apparently feel is maybe even a little ahead of Luke Montgomery, played, second-year guy, was okay, but was sometimes one of the issues that you saw at the point of attack, or I think they said maybe had a couple missed assignments. He almost graded out a champion, but didn't grade out as champion. So that's tremendous for a second-year player in his first start and first game. That's an incredible achievement. But that does, if he's ahead of Montgomery now and he's only playing because Donovan Jackson was out, it tells me probably not this year for Montgomery.
Yeah, they've got 4 guards with Donovan Jackson, Sierveld, Taylor Shabola, and Carson Hinzman. Those are the top 4 guards right now. And I said it in preseason practice. Once we started seeing Luke Montgomery at center, it felt like they were trying to make him the backup there. So then the question would be like, who would be the next guy in if Seth McLaughlin goes down? Would they move Carson Hinzman back over, or has Luke Montgomery gotten to the point? Now, I didn't get a chance to go back and watch it yet when the second team offensive line was in there. If Montgomery was the center at that point, but I don't see him starting this year. I do see him starting somewhere next year.
All right, boy, I was about ready to wrap it up, but here's one from Drowsy Dragon we cannot skip. Any chance Urban would go back to Florida once they fire their coach, Billy Napier, who is probably not long for the position?
What's his buyout, like 20-something?
26, I think, something like that. So not big enough to prevent them from doing something. Urban, he doesn't have to worry about Saban now. Do you think, someone asked me this over the weekend, do you think Urban Meyer ever coaches again? I feel like my answer is no.
No, I don't think so. The game is different now. And he's been around it and he sees it and he talks to all of the coaches, and I'm sure they tell him all of the miserable parts about it. And that's some of the things that are trying to convince him that I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Because once you're doing it, you got to do all of it. And the fun part about coaching is coaching, and the thing that head coaches don't get to do anymore is coach. So I wouldn't, if he wants to go coach, go do it in high school.
Well, and Urban, I think, worked very well when he could just sort of point and yell and tell people what to do. And the balance of power within college football is changing a decent amount and has changed quite a bit even since he was at Ohio State. And I think you saw some, there were probably multiple problems with his Jaguars tenure, but one of them was when you have guys who are making more than you or as much as you, well, you don't. The balance of power is not what it was when you were coaching guys who were playing for scholarship and book money.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that would go great. Last up, it's just me, Tim, referencing the Monty Hall problem that I mentioned earlier. He says that's fallacy. Choosing the second door does not increase your chance to win. It does. I've read a bunch about this. It actually does. We can either talk for 45 more minutes or we can wrap it up. So you're going to have to just read some stuff.
Yeah.
More smarter mathematicians than me have come up with reasons why it does, even though it seems like it wouldn't. So there you go.
Yeah, that's Tom. Just trust me. I know. Trust me, bro. That's Tom with everything. But with this, if it's something on the internet, believe him. You know. But that will do. We've got to get out of here. Before we go, go ahead and hit the thumbs up if you haven't. We would appreciate that. Of course, subscribe. Hit the bell to be notified because, as you know, we go live. And also find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member. Check us out there as well. We would appreciate that. That is the best way to support what we do. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.